Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last episode of or the last session of the Perf Sprint for Web. And this session is all about React, wherein Ashok Vishwakarma, who's a GD in Angular, will be talking you through why exactly to move away from classes and use the function components instead. But right before that, let me just give you a brief overview of what All About Web is all about. So, I'll quickly share my screen and yep. So here we are. We are an amazing community of web developers, and our mission is just that, to create an amazingly vibrant community of web developers around the world wherein everybody feels empowered and welcome. And we are planning on doing a lot of sessions around web development, and these sessions would be around multiple tracks, multiple technologies and frameworks out there. So you can just expect us to do more and more sessions around the front end, which will have technologies, frameworks, libraries, whatever you call them, like Angular, React, Vue, Svelte, and vanilla JavaScript, HTML, CSS, etc. We will have a few events around backend technologies like Node.js, Dino, Python, Go, PHP, etc. Then we have tools like Docker, Kubernetes, GCP, Azure, and AWS. And we'll also have a few sessions on techniques like build, bundle, performance, and SEO. Meet our team. We currently are around 4 people in total. So we have Ashok Vishwakarma, who is also the speaker of this session. He's a Google developer expert in Angular and he hails from India. Then we have Gaurav Chauhan, who is the founder of the Youth Project. Then there's me, Siddharth Ajmera. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular and I'm based out in Australia. And then we have Srishti Jain, who's a senior developer at Advantage Technologies. And we are social, so you can find us almost anywhere on the web. Just navigate to allaboutweb.org, and in the footer you will find a lot of links out there that we have for our social handles. Like we are on Twitter, we are on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn. So please follow us right there, and you will get notified about all the different technology related events around the web that we are doing out here. Um, Talking about today's session and today's event in general, it's called the Perf Sprint for Web because it's all about performance and how you can build performant web applications using all the different um, JavaScript frameworks or libraries out there, and also a compiler which is Svelte. So yeah, it's all about these technologies like Angular, React, Vue, and Svelte. This was the whole agenda for today. So we already have had sessions on Svelte, on Angular, and on Vue by 3 amazing speakers. Um, the first one was about effective data visualization using D3 in Svelte.js, and that was taken up by Matthias Saal. Um, he hails from Germany, and he was talking about he had given an amazing talk about data visualization. Just in case you might want to check his talk out, here's a link to the recorded session of this talk. So please feel free to check that out. The second talk was about optimizing an Angular application, and it was given by Santosh Yadav, and he's a Google developer expert for Angular as well. And in case you want to check that out, here's a link to the recorded session of this talk. Then the third one, which is I guess still going on, is by Tarun Mangukia, who's the co-founder and CTO of Icon Scout, where he's teaching you how to build web applications using Vue.js and these applications, and how can you make them scalable as well. And just in case, again, if you want to check his recorded session, you can just navigate to this link and check it out as well. And finally, the time for the talk by the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Ashok Vishwakarma himself. So I guess let's start with that. Um, and I'll just add Ashok to the stream. Um, and get rid of this. Yep. Hi Ashok, how's it going?
Yeah, good. So just tell me how has
Yeah,
it been
sure.
so far?
So it was great. It was great. We were missing you, but unfortunately you had some technical issues at your end. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
think StreamYard was not supporting the output devices which I have, so that might be. Okay, I think
Okay.
let's get started on that.
Yeah, sure
I
thing. I'll
have
just add
shared.
you to the stream.
Mhm.
Uh, and over to you.
Okay. Hey everyone, hello YouTube. So we have started this initiative recently, all about web, and this is our second event. The first one which we have done with NG Girls, and that was an workshop. And this one is more on a performance side. So we are catering these four specific frameworks: Svelte, Angular, Vue, and React, to be more specific on that how we can tweaks and do some tricks to improve performance on these specific frameworks or application built using these specific frameworks. So let's get started into that. So my talk is about React and how the whole React team is introduced hooks earlier with React 16.8, and it seems like that they are driving the change in that direction where you should avoid using classes, and they are also trying to drive this whole React ecosystem into that direction as of now. So this talk is going to talk about those specific intuitions about how classes make a React app little more difficult, and how we can use function components and more functional approach to pretty much solve them. So get into that. Okay. So before we get into the React specification, let's talk about the web which we used to see before React was there. So everything was server side rendered. You have a backend language like PHP, Java, or anything, and you build your whole application into that, and then you pretty much compose those HTML, CSS, and then send to your specific browser. So that's where the server side rendering was, and everything was done into that particular fashion. Then JavaScript come along, and we started using and seeing little bit about dynamic HTML. The term DHTML is pretty much straightforward, like just a little bit of DOM manipulation, like clicking a button maybe hide some specific DOM element, or maybe appear some specific DOM element. So that's what DHTML was, and it was also very beginning of the JavaScript. After that, we had a little bit of jQuery and jQuery UI era, where we have played and pretty much get our hands dirty on JavaScript completely, and that's where the transition has started shifted. Like rather than doing everything on server, we started to do some sort of stuff on client side as well, and and that's the point where this paradigm of client side scripting and client side rendering actually arise. Then we use these two specific frameworks, Backbone JS and Angular JS, in order to cater that client side rendering approach, and these two were fabulous on that particular time. So when you actually do actually come from that specific background, and you see that everything was pretty much handled and developed in a certain way, we you certainly had urged that if these specific frameworks and these specific libraries were solving that such specific problem on that particular time, what changed now, why we are approaching and pretty much looking at React, and why it's having that big community compared to other frameworks and other libraries which we have in the ecosystem. So first thing first, React is very easy to learn. I'm actually from an designing background, and I have started my career as a designer, and then I transitioned to as an HTML and CSS. So when I look at React specific components and the JSX styling of of those specific components, I immediately feel a collect that I'm writing HTML with few here and there different markups, which also reminds me some templating engine like Jade and Smarty, which we used to do in the past. So it's pretty much similar to that. Like we are still not getting that much involved into the JavaScript scenario behind that, but yeah, I mean it's easy to get started with React just because of JSX uh, as what I actually found myself working on. Apart from that, React uses virtual DOM, which makes DOM updates very efficient. And there are lots of talks and lots of articles about virtual DOM is available. You can go and read them about more. What internally it does is it keeps a copy of your actual DOM into a virtual memory, and anytime if a DOM if React tries to update something, it's compare that virtual DOM with the actual DOM, and then split those changes which require that whole DOM to be manipulated, and accordingly just uh, pass those changes to DOM. So your virtual DOM and your actual DOM is always going to be in sync, and whenever your state or maybe application changes, first the changes received by virtual DOM, and then virtual DOM do a comparison and make the changes in the actual DOM. So that's what the basic virtual DOM pretty much is. Apart from that, it also result in better performance, because when you do these kind of efficient operation using these specific technologies, your runtime is pretty much increase, and you have a little bit more efficient and better performing web applications. Apart from that, compared to other libraries and languages in in JavaScript, which we have, the kind of environment and the kind of pretty much tools and services provided by React. React is very small in size. Having said that, those specific features and tooling provided around that. So the idea is, like, if your library is pretty much small, then you can zip your code in a fashion where you can immediately show some specific message or some specific loading or anything to the user. But if your library size is pretty huge, then that would become a little challenging, because first your library needs to get initiated, loaded, rendered, and compiled, and after that you'll be able to zip any specific code which your user will be looking at. Apart from that, React have a very huge community. If you look at the numbers, they have around around 155K GitHub stars, and similarly 238,000 Stack Overflow questions, 1.3 million live sites, which as of now there are certain Google data available around that, which built on React, and there are 100 plus active GitHub contributor to the React repository. Apart from that, if you see the trend that how react.js as a search keyword arise on Google Trends, you see that it's keep rising since 2016 or 14, 16 or 17, I guess. And that particular time when majority of us shifted from Angular JS to actually React. And although React was released pretty early, but it took a while to actually people to start using it and find out that it's pretty useful. So what exactly React is? So React is a specific library to build UIs, and these are some specific building blocks which we use as a terminology while actually talking or specifically using React. So first one is component. These are the basic building blocks of a React app. Think about your web application or a web page into different sections and different chunks, and those chunks can be divided into smaller components, and those components then you can combine and make your whole page. So that's what the component is in the React. Props are those specific properties which we pass onto the React components. Either we provided a specific data to that specific component, or maybe attach some specific event which we can handle inside. State are the mechanism by which a component can have some specific data, and then they can pretty much update based on that data changes. And every time some specific events happen inside the React component, like it's prepared to load, it's getting loaded, it's rendered, these specific some specific callbacks and hooks get called, those we call lifecycle methods. So here is a typical React component. If you see, it's just a counter. Uh, One of my friend Siddharth, when I saw him that I'm going to use a counter as an example, he said, no, 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 no. I think the counter example was used everywhere, but I couldn't find very simple and concise other example to actually put here, because this actually can this example have everything which you can have to make somebody understand that how a React component actually works and what sort of things it consists of. So as you can see here, I'm using a class component, and I'm pretty much inherited it from React.component, and parent can pass data using props, but I'm not using props here. What I'm using is I'm using internal state, which you can see defined on the top, and it have one specific property called count, and then I have two specific method which I'm using, actually using plus and minus, and then updating that specific count. And in the render method, I've clearly written some specific JSX, and this is what JSX is. You see, and lots of HTML tags over there, very similar to HTML, and then there are those curly braces where your actual JavaScript objects and JavaScript logics goes. So it does not have any lifecycle methods into it. It have state, and it have those specific bindings, event bindings on those specific buttons. So when we talk about classes in JavaScript, I find that classes are very hard for humans, and why I think that. Let's get into the details. So before I started learning JavaScript, I had to understand this particular phenomenon, that what prototype is, how prototype works, what prototypal inheritance is, how this whole phenomenon works. And it took me a while to get that, because I came from a background of PHP, which has very plain oops concept, and that concept defined that how class is supposed to be, although PHP also has certain restrictions when it comes to oops, but those specific classes were pretty much similar of any other oops concept which we have. But when I shifted that particular learning to specifically JavaScript, those specific things were not actually getting applied here, because this particular phenomenon is completely different. So I have to spend a lot of time and try to understand, and I still don't understand it completely, to be frank. There are still some bits and pieces which I get confused of. There are still some bit of pieces which I might not know that in deep, but this is the challenge which I feel the whole community feels about, like understanding prototype and understanding prototypal inheritance is a little bit difficult. Apart from that, there is a one other thing which everybody's scared of in JavaScript, that's called that this specific keyword. So this keyword in JavaScript works very mysterious way. Like most of us just always try to console log this and figure it out, that what I'm getting into that particular function or that particular scope. But yeah, I mean, if you search Google around this keyword, that how this was in JavaScript, you're gonna bombard with lots of articles and lots of messages which talk certain things, where this become even more confusing. But to actually get in perspective, because of this particular keyword, the ES6 classes have tried to pretty much simplify the way the way this works in classes, but still there are certain challenges which we face. For example, if you look this particular code, it's a very straightforward React component, and it's an hello class and it's used state. But this component have one specific error. Can you spot that? So so if you look closer, that particular handle click is using this inside that particular scope, but because this works differently in JavaScript, that in that particular mechanism, in this example, that this dot set state will not be available, because this would be pointing to this button instead of the whole specific class over here. So that understanding is not translated well in ES6 specification of class, and that's what I was trying to make a point earlier, that this is little bit confusing. So to actually overcome that particular situation, what we had to do is, in constructor we have to bind that function to actually use this, and this is how you can change a specific binding of any specific method in JavaScript. Apart from that, actually classes are also very hard to optimize. If you think of a class, you think of a properties, you think of methods, and most of the time what happens is those specific properties and methods are written at certain time of application development. And the way we are actually used to develop application these days, it it totally depends on the data and totally depends on the specification which have, but those specific data and those specific system keep changing every day. So our classes are not going to emanate all the time. So if we have to optimize one specific class and maybe remove some properties or add some property, it would be very hard to figure it out that how many places that property and that particular methods are being used within the whole class. And within the and with the function, it's very easy. You can trace back a function call from all those specific areas where that function is getting called, and you can use code mods, and you can use other specific editor tricks and tips to pretty much do that optimization. But properties and methods are which are attached to a particular class is not that easy to refactor, because they can be duplicated around multiple classes and multiple objects along the way. Uh, apart from that, I also found that classes are pretty much also hard for machines as well. For example, this one, like when we do a specific when we declare a class and try to do a specific tree shaking, because this phenomenon is pretty much very common these days. Every burn tool, every specific build tool is bundled with this particular feature called Tensor plugin, and the whole job of that Tensor plugin is to try to figure it out, that what code are being used and what code are not being used, and so that they can remove those specific portion of the code and pretty much make your bundle size smaller. But with the classes, what happens is, if you take this particular example in the React, and I have this particular method called test, which is not being used anywhere in the whole specific component. And if you look closely, the generated output of that particular component file, you see that method right there, and that method is not reshaked, because in classes for machines it's very hard to identify that what properties and methods are being used where. And some of the scenarios, those methods and properties can also be used inside a specific control statement, and that's why the removal of properties and methods is not that optimized in any specific tree shaking tools. The other thing is, when we use classes, property and method names are not minified, which means if you have very large and huge methods and property names, those gonna come exactly the same way in your bundle, and which tend to have larger bundle size. So if you take this particular example, this is a simple class person. It has certain properties and certain methods. And if you see the generated code of this particular class, it's pretty much similar, which we have written over here. Even if you compare line numbers, the output have a little bit comparatively bigger footprint compared to the actual source which we have written, although it's have certain information about the transpilation happens over there. But yeah, you pretty much get the idea that when your methods name and properties are not minified, you tend to have bigger bundle sizes. uh, it's also I figured it out that when we are actually pretty much working with classes, our hot module reloading doesn't work correctly. Like most of the time, it's tend to start building the whole application or maybe whole file which we are working with, instead of the class or maybe that specific property and method which we have changed. So if you look closely in your hot module reloading system, for that it's very hard to determine that either I have to do the change detection based on a property or a class, but instead of they just put a fallback over there to have this whole file re-render again when you press Control S. So this is also where it's a little bit challenging. And React class components have its own challenges. I mean, there was a talk at the time of release of hooks. They have described these things into very detail, but I'll just try to put a different perspective on that, and what my learning and understanding around that is. So first thing is reusing logic in various component, and the way we can do that, we have two ways to do that. One is using simply higher order components. So this is an example of Redux, where you have this particular to-do app and you have a to-do list component, and you just trying to use that shared state with some specific reducer, and you connect that. So this connect method which you are looking at here, it's called the higher order component, because this gonna wrap this to-do list component into a separate component, and that component will be having this particular methods and property which you see over here, and then these methods and property will be passed through props inside the to-do list, and you can access them. This mechanism is good, but it has certain challenges, that it only acts as a wrapper. So every time you try to connect one component to another, this gonna come as an wrapper into your hierarchy. And this also require your component to restructure. Like if you have certain things which you are doing internally in your to-do list component, then because now you are receiving that data through props, you have to do certain changes over there. Your addition and deletion of the to-dos logic gonna come to this particular page instead, this particular file instead of that, because that sharing would not be possible. So you have to restructure your whole component system if you want to pull that higher order component approach over there. The next way to do that, the next way to share specific logic across the component is using render props. So if you see this particular example, what is happening in this example is there is a component called data provider, which have a specific property called render, and in render you actually getting the state which you require, and that state you can use specifically in the component as in callback. So this particular technique works as a callback. So every time you want to provide data to your component which require the data, you have to wrap those component into this data provider component, and you can pass those component as an callback inside this particular render function. Similarly, they also receive the data in the same way, like this particular object, and then you can pass that object through a specific props and a specific mechanism, and this gonna be used as in children inside that component, and then whole thing gonna be rendered. These two things lead this, which is called wrapper hell. Like every time you just wrap your component into a different component, and if you keep doing that in a more complex examples, this come to this particular phenomenon where your DOM tree looks like this, where you have lots of components wrapped around lots of components, and you it's very difficult to actually figure it out that which is actual component and which is the wrapper component or component over here. React class components also very prone to become too giant and very harder to read. To actually understand this, let's look at this particular example. What this example does is it's just have one specific lifecycle method called componented mount. And in that method, what I'm doing is I'm subscribing to a store, and I'm also fetching some specific data from network, and I'm also starting a timer. So these three specific things which I'm doing over here, and because I'm doing that particular three things, after if my component is unmounted, I have to do that exact three opposite things into component will unmount. Like I have to unsubscribe from that store which I've subscribed to. I have cancel if any pending request which I have through my fetch data, and if I and I have to stop the timer. Even in more complex example with component data update, this whole scenario is completely different, because now I have to take these two specific props, previous props and next props, and then compare them all together, and then try to tell React either you need to update or you don't need to update. So this whole thing, if you see, and this specific example is very small as I can see, but in this scenario, because fetch data needs to be handled, because that's going to be a then function, so this example is going to be very huge, and that's the result a huge component over there. Apart from that, the three specific problems in this particular approach is because logic is split into multiple methods. It's very hard to follow. Like you have to, if you want to understand this particular component completely, what I have to do is you have to look out these specific three methods, and then you're gonna picturize the whole specific things what this component is pretty much doing around those specific logic. And this is prone to memory leaks, because if I accidentally couldn't accidentally forgot to stop that timer, the timer will be keep running inside my whole specific application lifecycle, and that's going to have a significant memory loss over there. So is there any alternative to class component in React? Sure, we do have function component. So this is a function. This is an example of a function component, and how this sets up is here is like it's receiving the information from props, and it's just acting upon those specific props. So function component in React is specifically called stateless component, because they cannot have any state, and they only have that one particular approach to get information when parent pass the data using props. And as they do not have their own state, so they cannot do that set state and other specific stuff. And they also don't have lifecycle methods, because when they are not getting into that particular hierarchy where they have their state and they have to maintain themselves the way, so the responsibility to do that, those specific hooks and those specific maintenance comes to the parent component, because now this stateless component is controlled by completely towards your parent component. And this result another problem, which is called like to share that particular component among multiple component is going to be a little difficult, because it's controlled by your parent component. So your parents need to have shared some specific logic to make that component work everywhere. So what about hooks, which is released in React 16.8, and I think that's the time where this whole class things is actually become more painful, because now we have an option to pretty much ditch the classes completely. And they release hooks in 16.8 just to make that particular statement out in the world, that classes have some specific problems in React ecosystem, and we want to drive this whole community into a more functional approach. And and there are certain benefits if you're going to do that. So if I have to restate that statement, because React 16.8 releases hooks, now we can say that a function component can support state using use state, which is a hook, and it can have a lifecycle method using use effect. So this thing become clear now. Now that clear distinction which React had made since the beginning, that a class component and function components are two different, is talking about two different way of looking at React component completely. Now they have minimized that gap completely, and now there is no certain difference of using a class component or using a function component. Just the only difference is the way these two pretty much set up and pretty much getting used. So the first good thing you get when you start using function component in React is because Java React function components are JavaScript functions, a pure function which you can say, and it's have all those specific properties a JavaScript function have, like which you can see. So it's actually get bitter tree shaped. Like if you see this particular example, this is a function component, same component. I've just created a function version of it, and it have that specific method, our favorite method, like the test, which needs to be tree shaped. And if you look the output of this particular function component, that method is not into the compiled version of output, because that is not needed. And this certain things is what the function goodies you can get. Apart from that, a function component also helps you to do minification in a better way, because every time you create a function, your minifier will gonna convert that function name into certain smaller names like A, B, E, F, G, whatever the current series is on that. And based on that, you're gonna have a very smaller bundle size around that, because a function component can have their own state. You don't need that higher order component junks altogether, which means you don't have to deal with that wrapper hell problem anymore. And how you can get state work in a function component, you can look at this particular example. It's using that use state hook from the React package directly, and it have a kind of phenomenon where you have this particular variable and one specific function which gonna update that particular variable. And uh, and and you can have multiple state calls on any specific single component. To understand it better, it returns a stateful value. What stateful value is, that value is depends on your set count or set value function call, what that value gonna be. So every time you call that value, it's get updated. A function which update update the value. And if you see that particular thing clearly, because earlier we had set state, and that was taking an object all the time. This particular time, this whole scenario is pretty much changed. And where your use state thing gonna be a single value object, or maybe a single value, or a single value primitive. You can you pretty much change them with using that particular method which they have given. But and one thing to actually note over there, because in set state, your object tend to merge. So suppose you have two specific properties when you begin your state initiation, and then you are just passing one specific property into the set state method. What internally React does is it's merge those two specific object and make your state based on that. But in use state hook, that particular merging will not happen. It Actually, what happened is, whatever value you pass that into that particular function, it get replaced by the previous state. And similarly, on set state call, your function get rendered each time, and you have also pretty much every time you call this set count function, your component will be re-rendered. Similarly, we have seen that in class component, we have to pretty much look at multiple life cycle methods to pretty much understand the whole specific code, and that also prone to make our component more specific in the engine. In hooks, what happens is they give you this one specific method called use effect, and this use effect does all three things. It which requires specifically to deal with on React component React component lifecycle. So for to understand this, it's accept a function which gonna be a callback to your use effect hook. It's fire on mount and update by default. So if you look closely on this particular function example, there's one specific second argument which I pass called props.change. So it's looked for that particular property to, when that property will change, then this particular callback get called. So that's where your component did update thing or component should update things comes in. And it doesn't do that much nesting comparison. Actually, it's do a shallow comparison. Like if your object is equal to that object, it's not fire, and if your object is not equal to that object, it will be fired. So if you want to make these things work, don't pass the actual object into that. Try to pass primitive so that it can have better way of re-rendering and reusing that particular effect. Uh, it's also have a cleanup call. So if you return something inside that use effect callback, that return method will work as a cleanup. If you want to do any cancel pending request or maybe stop timer and stuff like that, you just return a function out of your use effect, and every time your component unmounted, that return function get called automatically. So now you don't have to worry about putting those two specific logics into completely separate two functions, and then pretty much determining that, okay, did I forget that or should I use that, and specific things about that. So and apart from that, what you can also do is you can create custom hooks. So if there are certain utility which you wanted to do on a very specific time, like getting window height and maybe setting window height and stuff like that, you can create those specific things into a separate function, and then you can use that as a custom hook. So here is an example of custom hook, which is built to pretty much get you the window width. You can set the window width and you can get the window width as well. So if you're using this particular win width, all you're gonna get is you're gonna get the width of the window anywhere you're gonna use this particular hook. And if you look closely, what it do is it's using state and it's using hook. So it's also adding an event listener, which is on window resize. So every time you resize, this handle resize function get called. Handle resize function is actually using that set with internal state and setting the width, and this whole custom hook is returning your width as in to use on various places. And this only we apply to the component you're going to call. So this custom hooks works in a way like this use state will be part of that component, this use effect will be part of that component too. So you can have multiple use state and multiple use effect inside your component, and you can combine them and create custom ones, and then you can share them across your project, because this is a simple a function call. You can make it call anywhere you want. So it's custom and composed hook, can be shared among components, act individually for each component, so they will not talk to each other and they do not have any memory leaks and things around that. And they can be composed through multiple hooks. Like in this example, I'm using use state and use effect both to compose one specific custom hook. Apart from that, most of the time which we find a little bit challenging in React is dealing with shared store, which is like using Redux or context API into the class-based system, where we have some specific information shared, like filter of your whole application, or maybe some metadata of your whole application which you want available throughout your application, and you want to change them based on certain activity and certain events happening inside your React application. So I try to put one specific shared shared state, and which you can use internally your application as an alternative to Redux, I could say. So in this, what I'm doing is I'm just defining one specific state, and I'm defining a reducer which have two specific method. One is which is called plus, and one is minus. So these two specific use case, what they're gonna do is they're gonna either increase that count value, or decrease that count value. A typical way we set a reducer in Redux specifically. And then I'm using that reducer and creating a context. So React context is another thing which I'm using here. It's a very plain pub sub model which you can get, and it gets you a provider and a state, and and a dispatch method, and by which you can dispatch certain actions and use that state, and you can wrap your things into that particular provider. So in this store.js, what I'm doing is I'm creating a context, and that context gonna give me store.provide actual provider and consumer. So consumer I'm not using here, I'm just using provider, and I'm creating a store provider component, which is a function component here, and I'm just returning that. Exporting that, and I have also created a custom hook called use store, which is using that particular context, and it's get you that particular state value which I am assigning over here. So if you look closely, what it actually doing is it's setting up a little bit a very small pub sub model in your application, and you can use this provider to wrap your component anywhere, and then this PubSub model will be available to that particular component. And to use that, what I'm doing is, because I'm wrapping my whole app into that, similarly, we wrap our whole app in Redux, like the Redux provider or state provider or store provider. I don't recall the actual name as of now. And here I'm using that particular provider altogether. So and then to use that particular store, what I'm doing is I'm just using, because use store is an hook, I can use it similar to any other hook. And now my count and my this particular to do app become a shared state to do app, where we have all this where I'm dispatching this plus and minus as a type, and which is gonna go to my reducer, and reducer gonna make the necessary changes in the state, and state will be available into the count specifically, because my store gonna have count and dispatch both. So I can dispatch it and I can use the count internally. And because these two are a specific constant, they are not attached to any object, they are not attached to any specific way, they're gonna get minified pretty well, and they're gonna have that particular function goodies around them. So let's talk a little bit about conclusion, that what all those specific things. And I think there are two specific questions on YouTube stream which can also be answered into this conclusion. So first thing which I get out of this whole hook phenomenon and the whole function approach phenomenon is a better and cleaner React, where I don't have to deal with a lot of junks and a lot of stuff which I have to put very close attention to understand. As per their specific documentation and their specific discussion which we have on in the community, there are no plans to remove classes from React as of now, but we are not so certain on that. They might, or they may remove in the future versions, but as of now they are not. They are saying that they don't have any plan to remove that. So don't rush to migrate your classes completely. I would suggest take it to a very steady and concise approach. Build new stuff on this particular approach. Keep the older stuff that way, and try to migrate in chunks if you really want to migrate it. It's 100% backward compatible. So class component and function component, as in earlier in React, can sit into the same project and can sit in together. And hooks are also in the same way. They are 100% backward compatible with no breaking changes. Context API actually make reusability a little bit difficult. So when you actually going to use them as less as possible. I mean, try to keep multiple context instead of single one. So every specific, so just think about your application in models, like a user your user is a user model, your publisher is a publisher model, something like that. In that approach, what you're going to do is you can create these pop-ups based on your models, and then those models will have their own internal state and internal subjects and stuff like that. So that's where this all thing is. So that's all from my side. Thank you, thanks a lot. If I think there are certain questions which I can take from the comments itself as of now.
Yep. That was a great session, by the way, Ashok. So
From can't do but
thank you
class
so much.
component can do you think class component will be depicted in the future? So as I've answered earlier on that particular question, as per their specific comments and their specific discussion, they are not saying that they're going to deprecate the class component in near future. I mean, they have no such plan as of now, but maybe in the future, which looks like, because they spend a lot of time and they have that particular agenda set, that function is the future for React. So I don't know what time it will be where they're gonna remove that particular thing completely. Difference between hooks and components. So hooks and component are completely two different things. They are not comparable. And hooks are a utility which get your component to do certain things which a simple component can't do. So like maintaining internal state, or maybe having some specific life cycle around that. So those specific two things over there. So I think that's all, and thank you.
Okay. Um, yeah. So I guess we can wrap up the session. Thank you all so much for listening. And first of all, I probably forgot, but yeah, happy Independence Day to each and every one of you, especially all these people who are joining from India. Uh, happy, I wish you all a very happy Independence Day. And yeah, thank you all for listening, joining, tuning in from anywhere around the world that you have been in. And this was just one of the many future events that we will be doing around web, uh, and around different technologies that I've talked about before Ashok's event, before Ashok's talk. So please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you are watching us on YouTube. If you are watching us on Facebook, please like our Facebook page, and make sure to also subscribe to our YouTube channel just in case, because that way you'll get notified about all the future events that we will be doing, and for sure we'll be doing them. So yeah, apart from that, please do check out our website. It's um, allaboutweb.org. Let me check if I can probably put up a banner here. So, and also, yeah, we are still accepting questions. So, just in case you have any questions, please fire them at Ashok and he'll be happy to answer them. So, yeah, that's our website. Um, please feel free to check that out. All the links to all our different social handles is present there. So, yeah, you'll be able to reach out to us and do the thing. Also, we were running some sort of a promotion throughout the event. I probably forgot to mention about this as well. But yeah, we were running um, this promo wherein, just in case you liked the event, and if you wanted to share some feedback regarding it, you could probably post a photo of you or the screen that you are watching along with the hashtag AllAboutWeb, and we'll probably pick up a few winners, mainly from India, and then we'll be sending out all about web merchandise to these five lucky winners. So, just in case you have any pictures, you might have taken a screenshot of something, please feel free to share it on Twitter with the hashtag all about web events or all about web, and we'll be announcing the winners soon. Let's see if we have any more questions. Mention FB link in the description. Yeah, sure, Amit. Um, we'll do that.
And I'll share him, or I'll share them. I'll share him personally. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. Okay. So for the audience who might need it as well, I'll share it for them just in
Cool.
case. Anyways, so all the links to all our handles that we have on the web is present on the All About Web's website in the footer section. So you can feel free to check that out just in case. All right, then I guess that should be a wrap. Thank you all for tuning in, and the wish you all a very happy rest of the day. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, thanks everybody. Bye bye.